important position in the EU institutional makeup. And we thought it's important in this great gathering of civil society that we invite them to come and talk to us about the plans. Yesterday we heard from the ALDE candidate, Commissioner Vestager, and today we have the pleasure to hear from one of the two Green candidates, the co-candidates for president. Bas Eickhout is the leader of he's an MEP of course, and he's also the leader of the Dutch Greens, and he has the great opportunity to talk in his own country, but to a much more European audience. And we look forward to the discussion he will be having here on stage on interview, both because of everyone who is here, but also because we are live streaming this for an audience far and beyond. Enough for me. I will invite both Bas and Alexandra, who will be doing the interview today, to join me in the stage. Please give them a round of applause.
Thank you very much. We're very excited to have Mr. Bas Eickhout. I had to learn how to pronounce this name, and so will the rest of the French people, I believe, because écoute is how we tend to pronounce it. Mr. Bas.
They always forget the H then as well.
They do.
Yeah, so as soon as they start writing it, it is really écoute, really.
So it's work for all of us to maybe learn a little bit about the Dutch language as we meet. It's a pleasure to welcome you here. I'll just remind all of you that Bas is a member of the European Parliament for the Netherlands, that he's part of the European Green Party. Of course, many of you know this. And that he has been so since 2009, so that's now 10 years. In a way, you reach kind of a peak in any MEP's political career, because now you are the Spitzenkandidat, one of two for the European Green Party. Would you have expected that to happen back when you were a young student? Would you have imagined to be here today?
Totally not. No. I'm not the person that always had wanted to go into politics. Totally not. I was a climate change researcher, and I was doing that for almost 10 years. And at a certain moment, you had the feeling that, well, you can continue on climate change research. Research is never done. But you had the feeling like, okay, the big messages are known now. And the real problem lies at the political side of the story. It's not at the scientific side, but it's at the political end of it. That we know we need to change, we know what to change, but how to do it. So therefore I thought at a certain moment I need to take that step to the political side. For me then it was also obvious that I want to do that at the European level. So there's also sometimes people think, why European Parliament? But if you go into politics because of climate change action, it's logical to do that at the European level. It's sometimes difficult to explain to members of the national parliament because they think that the world centers around any national parliament. You have many national centers in the world, I think. But I really think that the real action happens at the European level. So I wanted to do that. So in 2009 that happened, and then suddenly I was politician. And sometimes I still feel like Alice in Wonderland. But yeah, I'm now 10 years a politician, so I'm even a very old, experienced one now.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible.
I thought you were saying yes, absolutely old, yeah.
But Spitzenkandidat is something special. It's a little bit beyond being an old and experienced politician. When you apprehend that role, how do you feel about, the weight of responsibility of potentially being the president of the Commission?
Yeah. No, it is certainly now the next level of the campaign that really makes it very interesting. I am now touring throughout Europe. What is really good is that the green issues are now really high on the political agenda. That has not always been the case. But now you really feel that in every country people are taking the streets, they are asking for climate action, and that you see, of course, also reflected in that Greens all over Europe are standing up. And it is very special that then you can be a kind of a European voice to all these national green parties. So they invite you, and it's really motivating to see that there is really a European green movement there. And I think it's great to be a spokesperson of that. So I feel very privileged to do that. And apparently people also get motivated if I visit them, so that's even better. But for me, it's also really good to see all the different countries. And I think I was already pretty European-minded, but even this campaign makes me more European-minded because the countries are different, but the issues are the same and the wishes are the same. And that is great to see that we are united on the issues that we need to tackle. And I think in that sense, it is nice to try to make this a European campaign. Of course, we also know that it's not a full-fledged European campaign yet. In the end, national issues will dominate as well. But I do feel that more and more it is getting a European campaign. And I think that's also what it should be when you are electing a European Parliament.
I'm really glad that you brought up this fact of, green questions being at the forefront of everyone's political consciousness these days. And I think that, interestingly, that makes the situation quite complicated for being a part of the European Green Party. Perhaps complicated. Yeah, perhaps complicated because isn't everyone green today? And what does it mean to be the European Green Party? And how do you place yourself? Can you give us a little bit more? Do you still stand out in this political scene?
I think probably there's a lot of politicians that think that talking about climate change makes them a green politician. I would say they passed the first step. And I think many steps are to be taken still, because it's of course not about talking about climate change. I think this is exactly why people are taking the street. Why every Friday schoolers are saying we need climate action. And I think what we have seen now is that there's a lot of political groups now talking about green issues, talking about how important climate change is, and I do feel it. I've done now a couple of debates, and every time the other parties start, climate change is crucial. It's like, okay, great, that's really great. Yeah. But then, of course, but shall we now talk what we do about it? Because this is, of course, why the students are on the streets, because they feel like that until now we're not doing enough. And every policy that we achieved at the European level, it's insufficient to really prevent climate change. And this is, of course, why we need policies in place and we need to do more. And there, until now, it has always shown that it's the green politicians that are then badly needed in order to make the other politicians also act and not only talk.
So you're speaking about these students, and these are the students that all across Europe are turning mainly to their national bodies. Why do you think that it is that they're not turning to Europe, and what can Europe concretely do to implement these changes to go towards a more sustainable situation?
No, I think they all are also turning to Europe. Of course, they are gathering in all the capitals. But for example, in Belgium, quite often the marches are also deliberately going to the European Parliament. We also had some of those schoolers in the European Parliament in Strasbourg in March. Greta Thunberg will be in the European Parliament this Tuesday. So they do realize that they also need to be at the European level. And why? Well, very clearly, if we are talking about very basic policies like putting a price on pollution, which really is kind of, it's the simplest thing you need to do first, is making sure that companies start paying a price for their pollution. That you need to do at the European level. You need to do that so that you are talking about the entire internal market that we have at the EU level. Then it's logical that you try to put a same price on pollution on every company in Europe. So here you need European policies. But it's not only about the price. Think, of course, for example, about standards that we are putting in place. Well, we had a huge fight with the car industry, mainly the German car industry, of course. But there, also, the only way to make the German car industry move is when we are putting tough standards on them. That's also European policy making. We're talking about agriculture, greening agriculture. It's European policy making. We're talking about energy decisions. It's European policy making. So in the end, what you will see is that Europe is delivering the basis of what needs to be done. And then, fortunately enough, national countries have the freedom to do more, because we always know that what we can achieve is a compromise. Then we need countries who say, but I want to do more. which then of course creates a pressure from inside, so that at the European level I can then also go to the next level again. And that play between national policies and European policies is the only way to get us in full implementation of Paris.
So let's talk about the European scale, shall we? So,
Yep.
So when we speak European scale, still many people all across Europe think about the EU as a market, as a supermarket even, is exactly what Michel Barnier was saying on this very stage last night. He was saying we need to reimagine the EU to be more than a supermarket. And that is one of the crucial questions that many of the young voters will be asking candidates from the Green Party. Is the market economy compatible with sustainable goals and climate action?
Certainly an unregulated market, totally not. It will not be compatible. And why not is because we are living in a fossil economy. And for all the liberals out there who still think that the market is just getting there on its own, it's policy decisions that created this fossil economy. Do you really think we got in this fossil economy because in the beginning of the 20th century the government just said, well, we'll leave it to the market and we'll see what's happening? They deliberately created, stimulated this fossil market. It gave us a lot of development. So in those days, people didn't really realize that there's also a downside of it. So back in those days, policymakers created that. Now we are at the point where we need to step out of this fossil market and create a new green, renewable market, sustainable market. You need policies for that because, of course, when a market is in a track, it will stay in that track if you don't put policies in place. And that's where the regulation comes in. This is where you need to do that with pricing mechanisms, with targets, with norms, with quality standards. That's the way. There's a lot of tools you have then in your position, but you need to regulate it. Otherwise, we are not getting out of that fossil track. That's the basis why we need policy making. And again, then it's logical to do that at the European level. I'm happy that now also people like Barnier are seeing that, but it took a while. And still there are some liberals out there who still think, well, you know, we put a price on carbon and then the market will solve it. No, it will not be, because then you will not get rid of your fossil addiction.
Yeah, but you're speaking about a fossil economy towards a green economy. What if we just take on the broader concept of a capitalist economy? How would the Green Party approach the capitalist issue and the social inequalities that come out of it?
Well, I think that, you know, we can have, of course, have a very long discussion about this capitalistic economy, and it has a lot of downsides, because the entire idea that we had a while ago, I think it really got a bit out of hand with Thatcher and Reagan, so 80s, 90s, where the Social Democrats also gave in to that direction, and that's the path we took, politically speaking. I think now it's even IMF, it's the World Bank. This entire idea that general economic growth, and it will trickle down and we will all benefit, it's not happening. What we see is that there is a huge inequality that has been creating in our society, and therefore you see a lot of pushback on that. But I think what is now the biggest danger is that some political movements say, well, see, this is a very unequal society that we created, and that's why we need to abandon Europe. But this is exactly the wrong answer, because we have now a globalized economy. And whether you like it or not, there is this globalized economy. If you then think that you can beat that globalized economy by staying national, well, good luck. And I'm sure that a lot of companies wouldn't mind that, because they will then have the control over the global direction. So this means that we at the political level need to organize ourselves better to start at the European level. And one of the really basic issues there is taxation. Taxation is still a national issue. So what we have created in Europe is indeed this internal market where the companies are profiting from. They have one quality standard for 500 million consumers, quite often putting a standard that is then also globally copied, so they profit from that. They have one labor market because we have freedom of movement of people, so they also profit from that. But then taxation is nationally organized. Every country decides, you know, very proud of that sovereignty. We can decide on our own taxation levels. And what we see is that the level of taxation on companies is going down year after year because every country is saying, well, I lower my taxes on companies because then it will come to me. And the next year, the neighboring country will lower their taxation. On average, company taxation in Europe went down from 35% to 20% over the last 20 years, and it's still going downhill. And that has an impact on the income of governments. And this is, by the way, the official rates. Then on top of that, you have tax avoidance. So they are then using on top of that all the options that different definitions of countries give them, so that they even pay lower levels of taxation. That together is taking away revenues from governments, and they can do two things. They can raise taxes on other issues, things that are less mobile, people. So we see VAT going up in every country. We see the cost of labor going up in everywhere. Or the other reaction is you just cut your expenditure. And that's usually social welfare. And this is really the bottom line where people feel like this unjust development, this inequality in our society, that is getting bigger and bigger. And then, of course, if we're not going to address that, then we will never get the support for the European Union, because then the people will not have the feeling that Europe is for them, but only for companies. And that is now the biggest challenge that we need to change.
So it's really good to have this opportunity. Yes, take the time. It's really good to have this opportunity to really pull the green ideology beyond just the climate conversation. And I'm going to bear with me, just follow me a minute. We were here at the Democracy Alive Festival, and in the Green booth, they were organizing a workshop on imposter syndrome, so on basically the feminist pillar of the Green Party. We know that the other Spitzenkandidat is a woman, and sorry if I get this wrong, it's Ska Keller from Germany.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about what it means to be green and to be a feminist? And maybe about your relationship with the other Spitzenkandidaten?
Yeah, no, I mean, when you are talking about an equal society, then of course one of the other big problems we see is the inequality still between men and women. If you just look at the wages, the inequality there, it's just, this should not be there in the 21st century anymore. So we still have a very unequal society, and that's also why we as Greens deliberately always say, when we are doing any leading position, we always make sure that it will be gender balanced, because that is also so important, also to show to our society that we need to change that, because it is still a male society, a male-dominated society. And this, by the way, also leads to quite a lot of these CEO decisions at the top level, where you have the male boardroom, it's usually old grey men. I'm not always sure that they are the best people to take the decisions for the future. So here you see one of those issues, and that's why we are deliberately deciding on that, to always have two lead candidates. And my relation with Ska, that's great. And we are now even benefiting from it, because now when we are touring Europe, we can do that too. So we can be at different countries at the same time. So this week, when I was in Slovenia, Ska was in France, and this is how we do it. So it's even convenient. But don't tell the others. Let the men run the show by their own. We just do double work.
So walk us through that. What does that mean concretely to have two Spitzenkandidaten? Let's hypothesize. If the Green Party gets the majority, then what will happen? Who will be presented for commissioner?
Oh, I always say let's cross that bridge when we get there. But maybe I really want to say something, and that is that it is about time that the European Commission now will finally get a female president, because that has not happened yet. I don't know whether a lot of people are now applauding, because then they think, oh yes, so it's Ska, not him. But I think that answers your question also.
Yeah, but doesn't that make that a strange campaign to run for you?
Why?
Because then the aspect of running for a Spitzenkandidat is a supporting act for Ska.
No, because we do it together. You know, that's maybe a very strange idea, but
that's what I'm trying to get to the core of that collaboration. How does that occur as across borders between Holland and Germany, and then across genders, and just together running that campaign?
You know what most important about the campaign is bringing your ideas across. This should be a European campaign on which direction is Europe going. Do you go for the status quo of the center parties? Do you go for the populist answer, which is like, I don't want that, I don't know what I do want, but I don't want that? Or do you go for a different pro-European, pro-change sound? That's what we do together. That's the messaging we do, that we do in close cooperation. If that will be so successful that at a certain moment we indeed will be at the position that we are also going to deliver the president of the Commission, then we will of course make very clear who that will be. But for now, it's about a campaign on ideas. It's a battle of ideas, and I think it's even better if Ska and me can bring those ideas together.
But that decision for who is ultimately presented will be made within the Green Party.
Of course, yes. Yeah.
Of
and
course.
as I said, it is a bit time for a female president of the Commission.
I like that wink. That was great.
Did I? Oh dear, sorry.
So, yeah, I suppose it's the perfect time to speak about, you know, your experience with the past commission, which we all know as the Last Chance Commission. Yeah. And don't worry, it's just an opportunity to be constructive and to look for expectations
I'll try.
towards the next one. So how have you experienced, you know, the past mandate, and what were its particular failings that we can perhaps build upon?
Well, I think this commission started on the wrong foot. They started indeed with the claim that we are the Commission of the Last Chance. I never really saw that urgency, by the way, then. After, if you say that you expect a bit of an urgency after, well, if you see Juncker, it's always difficult to see that. But I think what the wrong foot was that they then started to say, yeah, for us, Europe needs to be big on big things and small on small things. So having the idea that the big criticism on Europe is there because Europe was doing too much. I think that is a total misreading of why there is so much criticism. In my reading, people are dissatisfied with Europe because it didn't deliver on its social promises. It did not deliver enough on its green promises and did not deliver on protecting our democracies. That's why people are dissatisfied. The biggest fan of that agenda of deregulation that this commission started on were the big companies. They were applauding on this better regulation agenda because they felt like, oh, now we can finally get rid of some of the social and environmental legislation. I think that was really the wrong start. They corrected that, by the way, partly under pressure of us as Greens, because they realized that on some issues they did make mistakes. But I do think that that was a couple of lost years. Then, of course, they focused very much on the refugee crisis, but that was a very difficult one. There, I don't think it's fair to be very critical on the Commission because the problem was more at the national level, but still they got so stuck into that they were not looking at all the other issues about our future economy. And meanwhile, while this was happening, they let, for example, a country like Hungary off the hook. And this is about the core of our democracy values, right? Where they were taking action against Poland, but only because the Polish government was not part of these two center parties. So they were not a Christian democratic or social democratic government. So they were tough on Poland. But they were not tough on Hungary. They were not tough on Romania, because Hungary is Christian democratic, Romania is social democratic. So they start doing party politics on the rule of law. That's really, you can't do that. The rule of law are the fundamental values where we base our European society on. You should not do party politics with that. And that's unfortunately what this commission did. So at the end, what lessons can we learn? I think that we need a more active commission, which is very tough on the rule of law, because that's the basis where we are basing our European society on. And then secondly, let's then have a political commission who is clear on what are the key challenges. And then, of course, creating our future economy should be the first concern of a new European Commission.
So let's return to one of those comments you made about democracy, about the fight for democracy. How do you see the convergence of the fight for democracy and the Green movement?
I think what you see is that fight is in the end the same. It's the fight against the dominance of these central parties who are kind of giving you a status quo. And in many of these Central European countries, you feel like it's a lot of corruption going on, and it's maybe a bit more left-wing corruption or right-wing corruption, but in the end, it's the same corruption. And that we need to fight. And fighting corruption is really, of course, also the core of when I'm talking about an equal society. Of course, then you have to fight corruption, because corruption is a kind of the illegal way of creating this inequality. So that fits the green agenda very much. And this is also why you see, fortunately enough, still the same activism on the street. If you go to Poland, if you go to Romania, people are taking the streets because they are not happy with their governments. But it's not that they are saying, oh, please, now I want to get rid of this right or left-wing government, and then being replaced by the same corruption with another political color. They really want difference. They want a different change. They want to change their society. And I think that is exactly what we as Greens also are fighting for. So what you see is that the Green fight in a lot of those countries is having a slight different image, but the fight is the same. It's the fight for equality, for a new society, a progressive society that is future-oriented and leaving a bit the old habits of politics.
So let's speak about that new society. And the issue with that, new progressive society is that it may, for certain candidates, have outside borders. And so let's just quickly return on the issue of, refugees and migrants and exiles. How do you place the Green Party with relation to those current issues?
I think that we will always be fighting that we are there to help refugees. And to be very honest, I know that a lot of politicians are afraid of saying that, but if you look at the public support in Europe, in every country, there's a massive support for helping refugees. So what we need to do is making sure that how to help them, we do that in a much more organized and equal way within Europe. That means just changing some of the rules we have in place right now, which are totally stupid, where we are saying where the refugees are coming in, then those countries need to look after them and see whether they are real refugees or not. So that's one part of the issue. The other point is about migration. And the only way to fight illegal migration is to create legal routes of migration. You can try to fight illegal migration till the end, but it will always be there, so then it's better to start regulating it instead of pretending that it's not there. A lot of politicians are sticking their head in the sand, and there will be migration, so it's about time that Europe starts regulating it so that we can have legal routes, and that's the best way to fight illegal migration. And that's the two things you need to do.
What do you mean by those legal routes? Can you give us a tangible example of what that might look like?
That means that you know that people also for economic reasons want to come to Europe, and that means that you can better then also legalize that so that you have formal possibilities, so that you can also know where they are, they have the opportunities, you can also base your policies on that so that they have integration into the European society, and that you regulate that instead of saying no, we put a border here, we don't allow them, knowing that they will come into, where they will go into illegality, and that is creating much more uncertainty and anger in the society than if you start regulating it, and that's what I mean. And that's the other side of the coin of the refugees, right? The refugees is that you as a European Union have promised already for decades now that a real refugee also deserves a place to be supported. If they are fleeing, for example, if you are a gay in Rwanda, then you need to be helped also in Europe, and you have to have a safe harbor. Those are the two things that need to be regulated. We can do that. It's not rocket science. The point is that politicians are so afraid of addressing these issues that they turn away from it. And that is creating this unclarity. And then on top of that, you have populists who try to deal with them in one, right? They don't distinguish between refugees, migration. It's all foreigners. Well, if that's the direction of our political speech, then of course you are creating unclarity, and that's creating then also fear. And fear is usually your worst advisor.
Speaking of fearlessness, we're very soon going to turn to you, the audience, for an opportunity to ask a question to Mr. Bas Eickhout. But first, we're going to take very special questions because a workshop was held in this very room earlier today on the deliberative process and ways of asking constructive questions. And 2 questions by Anita and Francesca were chosen to be the best question to be asked to Mr. Bas Eickhout. Where can I find Anita and Francesca to ask their question? Hi. I don't know where the microphone can be found. It should come to you.
There is one. Yep.
Yes. Okay, so my first question seems to be outside of the scope of your activity, because it's not about the climate change, it's not about fossil fuels and things like that, but actually things that you are dealing with are just like other issues that the European Union is taking care of, like the climate change or Brexit or the defense of the whole continent and so on, and migrants and refugees are based on public support. Public awareness, a specific European mindset. And this is strongly based on information. And we, at the workshop, we discussed this thing, and we were thinking that a lot of bad things that are happening in Europe at the moment, I come from Poland, so you know what I mean, is the access to information that is based on facts or not on myths, that is not manipulated. So this digital or IT security is very important for people in Europe now. I know that what we took for granted 4 years ago in Poland suddenly changed. It turned upside down. It turned out that in Poland we no longer appreciate green power, that we turned to fossil fuels again. And generally people don't seem to bother. So this is the problem about information, about the quality of information. So our questions are, just a second, I lost it. How will you protect us from digital exploitation and keep our private data safe? This is the one question. How will you ensure that the big tech companies are held responsible for the quality of information? And could a public social media platform, European public social media platform, would be a solution? So these are the questions.
Thank you, and congratulations that you could ask the question. And you can ask any question, because I'm here as a lead candidate, so I should be able to talk about all these issues. I think we also were a bit broader than the fossil economy. This is a good question about our future digital economy, right? I think there were a couple of issues in your question. First of all, on data protection. I think as Europe, we made a good step there by making sure that our data are truly protected. And this is really one of the successes we've seen, that Europe was able to regulate that. A company like Facebook hated it. They were lobbying against it heavily. But in the end, when we got it adopted, they realized, okay, now it's there. Now probably it's then better to just join it. And from that moment on, they were saying, yeah, the European data protection should be done globally. The only reason is because they knew I have to now do it at the European level, then let's make the same rules globally wide, because that's easier for us. So they don't care about data protection. You need policy making to really make sure that that happens. And I think we really took a good step there. I think on data protection, that's one where we are improving and have improved. And by the way, I have to say that it was a green lead negotiator in the European Parliament who was doing that. So just that was the end of the commercial. Secondly, and this is about how to regulate the quality of social media. This is a tricky one, because one of those core values where we base our European society on is freedom of press, freedom of media, freedom of expression. And if I say those are our fundamental values which should not be politicized, that also goes in the other direction. That means there will be people telling lies. Telling lies is not forbidden. It is allowed. But what you hope is that people, of course, correct each other and that they know, hey, if you're telling that lie, then someone else is stepping up, you're telling a lie. This is, in the end, also for ourselves getting used to social media. I think what is most important, what we need to regulate, is transparency on who is funding what. Where does it come from? Because now, too often, we have no idea where the messaging comes from. And quite often, there is a political meaning, there's a political force behind it that wants to achieve something by telling those lies. Once we know that, once we have that transparency in place, people will be educated to understand that how they should judge it, how they should base it. There is an interesting research in the United States where you also have a lot of social media, certainly with a certain president even being very active on it. And in that research it was shown that the younger generation was much better capable of understanding what was fake and what was not. So that also gives a feeling that this is also something we need to get used to. Our society is changing so quickly that we also need to... You're nodding, but I'm positive there. I do think we can. Because if I can turn to Poland there, you're saying that people are not interested, for example, in green policies anymore. I think that's changing again. We now see for the first time when you had local elections in October, we see now green members of the local council being elected on air quality. Because people start realizing that the coal-fired power plants, which the PiS government is pretending to be culturally so important, well, they also see that it's polluting their air, it's killing their children. So you now see green local politicians getting elected because of the green agenda. So this is, our democracy is much stronger than we sometimes realize. And of course I also am concerned nowadays sometimes. But I believe in the resilience of a democracy. But the most important one is creating transparency in all the funding so that we know where it comes from, who is providing that, who is funding that. And this is also why we are fighting for transparency rules on financing of political parties, for example. Because we know also in the European Parliament there are quite some political parties that are getting Russian money. So that needs to be exposed, that people will know that. Then they can still vote for them. I'm not going to forbid parties on that. But as long as people know that, I have trust in the resilience of a democracy.
I kind of want to build upon that. You have trust in the resilience of democracy, but certainly what that points out is also the pace of democracy, which is perhaps a little bit slow. And as
you can remove the little bit, I think.
All right, let's just go all the way. Faced with the current climate emergency that we're faced with, and with the radical ideals that the Green Party might be working with, how do you make it happen? Faced with the challenge of democracy, to implement all of those reforms that need to take place?
I think this is the biggest challenge. And that's, of course, if you are putting a claim of change on the agenda, politically it's always much easier not to change things. Because if you don't change anything, business as usual will happen. So this is always the nasty part of being a progressive politician, because you want to change something. You need to build a majority to change something, which is much more difficult than just saying, I'm okay, let it happen. So this is the challenge. But I think what we always try to do in our policy making is finding changes in policy that are kind of really changing the longer term debate, where okay, this is not the exact level of what we want to achieve, but it is changing decision making. I give you an example, which I think is one of the best ones, is on cars. I love the cars, especially regulating the cars, because for years we had to fight against the car industry. They didn't want any tough CO2 standards because they just want to keep on selling their pretty old-fashioned combustion engine technology, diesel. This is where the Europeans, by the way, also because of decisions of governments, we went into diesel, we stimulated diesel again. There was a governmental decision behind to stimulate that technology. We did it always. I think now it's time to take it to the next level. But we stimulated that. So we are, as a European industry, car industry, good in diesel. So the car industry wants to keep on selling that. It's easy money making for them. And that's, of course, now we are at the phase that we know diesel technology will not be there in 20 years. So how to make sure that the European car industry will be at the forefront of the new technologies as well, and that we not let that happen by other continents, that in 20 years' time we are importing all the cars of the future and not making them ourselves anymore. So we fought for some tough CO2 standards, which, yes, we wanted to be tougher. But we knew the standards that we got in place now, where we got a political majority on, it will bring change in the boardroom because they will realize that those standards, they will not meet it, they cannot meet it only with their old-fashioned technology. So they need to change. And it was not even finally adopted. And then already the CEO of Volkswagen 1 month ago, and Volkswagen is the biggest car industry in the world, and the CEO of Volkswagen said, we are going to change our technology into full electric. So exactly what they have been fighting for years, they are now changing their attitude. And this shows you that even a policy that is not right away the green dream, but it's putting something in place, it will change decision making in boardrooms. And that's exactly what you need to achieve. So sometimes you need to put some clever policies in place, which is not immediately your green vision, but is bringing a direction in the CEOs' minds in the boardrooms. I think that's a good example where you can, even in a democratic system, really achieve change.
All right, so let's see if this is making our audience react. I can see a hand and a person. So who should go first? Let's activate your microphone if that's okay.
Try this one.
Well, let's first have. Shall we first have the reaction, or yeah? Shall we first have the reaction and then we can move on to the second question? Does that work for you? And just a reminder, we only have 12 minutes left approximately, so short questions for short answers.
Oh, sorry. I'll try.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your intervention. To be honest with you, I'm quite impressed by your solutions and happily endorsing some of them. I have a question. We are kind of all aware that in the 90s and in the 80s, the European Parliament was filled in with shipped political outcasts from their national member states, either retiring, outgoing, or a bit uncomfortable members. Now, part of the narrative suggests, as you mentioned, engaging with the young, gender balance, having two, lead candidates from two genders. Being represented, and like youth is included. Even this debate here that we are partaking in, I think it's tailored or addressing these new voters, first-time voters, younger voters that tend to be a bit isolated from the participatory process. However, I'm still feeling there is this notion, or there is this kind of a youth child section seat where we can, wave our flags and we can be motivated in this kind of informal or sometimes formal debates, and there are different formats for us to participate. But I haven't really heard from any tangible tool or mechanism to really empower or give the chance, and it could be even with a hardcore measure, which I personally don't endorse, but the quota principle, or is there any real motivation to break this glass ceiling for younger generations at large? I'm kind of old millennial, but still a millennial. And not only that generation, there's generations after the millennials, but to really give us space where we can voice our concerns and where we can actually represent our generations, and not being just given some other tools and some kind of dust in our eyes that we are represented, but yet we are not. because members under 40, as we know, it's a very small margin of the members of the European Parliament and so on and so forth. So you can give an example from your party experience or political family, but also at large, if there's any real solutions that are really addressing our needs. And I also represent a younger movement and a younger party. As you can see.
I saw. Yeah. No, partly it's a difficult question because there is, of course, and I think that's a cultural issue that in a lot of countries, it's also a bit like you need to be 20, 30 years in the system and then politically you can get at a certain position, which I think is a very weird mechanism. And this is where indeed you see in quite some countries, the older the better. I think that is a cultural thing. I think, for example, in a country like the Netherlands, that's already far less. So it's a different culture. I sometimes even would say for the Dutch, we should start re-appreciating the older more than we're doing. Because if you're looking at the leaders of the national parties in the Dutch parliament, now the big majority is between 30 and 40. So we have a huge turnover of politicians, and sometimes I feel we are turning them over too quickly, because sometimes experience also helps, you know. I say this, of course, because I'm getting old and have 10 years of experience, and I'm just afraid to lose my job. No, seriously, I think this is partly a cultural thing, but I also think that it is now changing more and more, and certainly at the European level. And I can now only talk about as a Green politician, because I cannot talk for the other political parties. And I see that many of the other, especially the center parties, they have an issue here. They have an issue of motivating young voters, young people to become member of their parties. You know, they have a bit of an aging problem. Christian Democrats and Social Democrats, you see that also in the electorate, that they are really still having a lot of the older voters, but having difficulties in attracting younger voters. So, but I am also not in favor, not at the political level at least, to start working with quota, because in the end, it's about democratic elections, and people should have a mandate of their electorate, and anyone who gets that electorate mandate should be eligible to be a politician. That's how a democracy works. You cannot exclude people from that process, because that's what you then in the end are doing. But I think what is important for a political party is that you start fighting for issues that younger voters are also more concerned about. And I think this is one of the explanations why Greens are doing so well. We see that really in all the analysis we do, young voters are in a big margin voting Greens. And the impact is that then also green or new people start being interested in it, and then you see them also becoming part of being the politicians. If you now look at the list coming up to the European Parliament of the Greens, and I see it from the Dutch, but I see it in the Germans, the average age is more or less 35 there. So I would say it's really a lot of new young politicians are coming, and I'm happy that the old day where indeed the campaign in Germany was send your granddad to Brussels is now more and more changing with a new generation that is skipping the national level of politicians and going to the European level because they feel their issues are being handled there. Just like I did that 10 years ago, and then I was 32, so then I still may have called me young then. So that was the reason why I also went into European politics. I feel that in a Green Party, there is no ceiling, there is no glass ceiling. It can be done. There's a lot of young politicians out there. I see the problem with other ones, but to be very honest, here I'm then very politically lazy. It's their problem, not mine.
Shall we move on to the other Shall we move on to the other question that won the workshop?
Thank you. Well, this is probably getting us back to the discussion before. And you've covered a lot of it already. So the question is how? What will you do? So given that environmental taxation has gone down, fossil fuel subsidies have gone up, and we know that this is due to lobbying, the number of climate refugees will increase. Air pollution is killing 400,000 people annually in the EU. How do you propose to make European citizens live sustainably, healthily, and within planetary boundaries?
The next question will be on world peace, I guess, right? No, I think, well, this is a bit the core of the program that we're trying to do. And how do we do that? I think what is very important is that I think we as Greens also more and more realize that only talking about environmental issues is in the end not mobilizing everyone. There will be people mobilized by that, but of course most of the people are concerned about their future. Do I have a future job? Do I know for sure that I can also retire and still have a pension? Will my children have good education? That's what people are concerned about. And this is really exactly what you need to put in place in your policy making. Your green policies put that in a broader perspective, not only environmental protection, but also talking about future jobs, but also talking about geopolitical issues. For example, I was in Lithuania beginning of this week, where they are so much concerned about the Russian influence on their society. Well, if you are changing your energy system, make it less reliant on fossil fuels and base it on your own energy production, which in Europe we don't have so many options but renewables, then of course also you feel that a lot of people in Lithuania understand that going through to that green economy will be in their benefit. So that's one part where you really make the green agenda a broader political economic agenda, and that's exactly why we are talking about an investment, a Green New Deal. On the other hand, always make sure that your policies are always connected with socially just policies. And that's why we talked about taxation, making sure that the fair price is being leveled, because then the people feel like this is a green transition, but it's also a socially just transition. If you do that hand in hand, I think then you will get a broader basis and you will get the support of more people. And that's also what we see in quite a lot of countries. Not in all the countries yet. Well, we talked about Poland, but there you see it's changing. I see it changing everywhere. And in some countries you have a bit more culture of green parties, so they are trusted more. In some countries like Poland, that tradition is less there. So that's then we try to build on that to make sure that also later on the people feel that Greens are more than just tree huggers. There's, by the way, nothing wrong with tree hugging. But I do that on my holiday.
So exactly, stretching kind of the coverage of green politics. I've been told that we're going to have a question from the women's lobby to the EU, and by Manon, who I can see in the crowd. Can anyone pass her down a microphone? Wonderful.
Hi. Yeah, I work at the European Women's Lobby. Just to present briefly the organization, we are a feminist organization. We are the largest umbrella of women's NGOs all across Europe, so we have members all across Europe. And we represent around 2,000 organizations. So we advocate for a feminist Europe, and to work towards this goal, we need gender equality to be at the heart of the European agenda, to make sure that everyone's rights are improved and protected. So what we are calling for at the European Women's Lobby is a Directorate General and a Commissioner focused solely on gender equality, but also that all EU institutions will implement gender mainstreaming as per the treaties. So we just wanted to know what are your thoughts about that.
Well, this is exactly what we are doing at the green level, the mainstreaming of gender politics. We really look at every law also deliberately on the gender aspect there. To be very honest, does it always make it better if you make it a different commissioner? I'm not so convinced, because in the end we need this in every portfolio, and you have the danger by making it a different one that you know that people will say, oh, we covered it over there in that corner, whereas it should be mainstream. So your second point, that it should be mainstream in every Directorate General, that is much more important, I think. And where it goes about discrimination, gender inequality, of course this should be for a commissioner who is looking at the rules, at our fundamentals of democracy. For me, gender equality is part of that. So this means, when we were talking about a tougher commission, it is also on these issues to countries, because that's still where the big battle needs to be done. Then on gender equality, it will be for sure that, of course, what we will demand is that we are not going to be satisfied again with a commission where, you know, at the end you have to beg for countries to come up with a woman. For us, that's really so painful to see that, and it's probably going to happen again. This is really also why you need green policies, because you will be assured that the gender equality will be at the basis of any new commission. But whether to make that a special commissioner, I'm not convinced there.
Are you convinced, Manon? No. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we've decided to take on the challenge of only being 5 minutes late. So we have 2 more questions left. And these have been prepared, one notably by the European Council on Refugees and Exiles. Can the person, hi, do you have a microphone?
Hi, my
Hello.
name is Hala Kari,
Hala.
Syrian, live in Sweden for 6 years, and I'm also a part of ECRE, European Council for Refugees and Exiles. My question is that how do you see the cooperation with refugee-led organizations in Europe and to have a place on the policy-making table and decisions when it comes to refugees? And this one question. And the other question, that how do you think that setting goals that everyone can be united toward this goal is something that can help integration? For instance, if we put the climate change as a goal and to unite people to solve this, so it can be like a kind of maybe faster integration because we have challenges rather than the differences between people, Europeans and the newcomers or refugees.
No, I think we touched upon it already a bit, right? But it's really, as I said, I really think that in Europe there's still a huge support for giving shelter to refugees. I think one of the biggest problems is that we don't have European solidarity in place how to deal with that. Now we see the countries where the refugees come in the first day, they are dealing with that. Then we got very crazy solutions like the Turkey deal, where we said, okay, we send them all back, which is not even allowed. So that's why they are now stuck in these refugee camps in Greece. And then if they come back to Turkey, you don't know how then we are, in the end, can judge every refugee on an individual basis, because that's the core. Every refugee has the right to be judged individually. That's the core of what we have promised and what we always should adhere to. And I think there the cooperation starts from, because I think that is too often now forgotten by people. They feel like once you have been portrayed that the refugees are a problem, then of course the only thing you start to do is trying to keep the numbers down and take them out. Then you are creating that fortress of Europe, which I don't think a lot of people desire. And I think this is important, that that message comes across, and that's where the cooperation starts. And there we can do that, because I think still the big majority of society wants to help and wants to create that equality and wants to also work on that integration. I think the biggest challenge we need to have now is that too many politicians in power are now profiting from not providing solutions. Because by not providing a solution, they can stir up the fear, and that fear is making them popular. And that's unfortunately what we see now in a couple of the governments right within the heart of Europe, which makes it difficult to get to solutions, because to them a solution would take away their electoral magnet power. And that's the problem we're having. And I think this is about also when we are campaigning, it is the moment to make these things clear to the voters, that the people they vote, they don't want solutions because they profit from non-solutions. And I think that's the political battle we need to do together.
Thank you for being with us for so long, Bas Eickhout. I think it's just one last question, and I can see it. It's in the corner. I can see it. Yes, great. All right. So just that one last question. Just remember, short questions, short answer, and then we'll be...
Sorry.
No, you're doing good. You're doing relatively good.
You're too kind. You're too kind.
I must say.
My name is Diang Zhang. My origin is come from China, a new immigration to France. I had been go everywhere, especially in France and Germany. I talking with lots of refugees and immigrants. I find, I think about there have lots of topics in the European Union, Parliament and the European Council and lots of conferences discuss about the refugee crisis. I think it's not about refugee crisis. It's about like the identity crisis. You know, immigration, we don't know who and I, where we need to go. Lots of people, they fall in it, not only refugee. Lots of people fall in it. We don't know who and I. So it's a crisis of like the identity. Inside the refugee, they have lots of people with a high competency. There are lots of Einstein, lots of Hannah Arendt. How to spell Hannah Arendt? There are lots of people full of intelligence, and they have tenants inside the refugees. So you have no solution for integration. How to integration this refugee and the foreigner is very difficult. I used to be a scientist in my country. I even go everywhere. I talk with every people. I discuss every topic about climate change, about the economy, the digital transformation, everything. I find it's very, very difficult, not only for all the refugees. So, where is the future? You know, for about the, you know, inside the Europe, you have lots of people, immigration from the different countries, lots of refugees. They need to integrate it in the Europe. It's a very important topic for the Europe future. Yeah. Thank you.
So that's a really good way to close kind of this discussion is on the European identity. Does it exist? How do we build it? And how do we integrate others into it? And that's our very last question.
To be very honest, I always get a bit nervous about the idea of should there be a European identity? I think there are a lot of things that is uniting us, but in the end, we are people. And really, wherever you go, the people want the same. They want to have a family, they want to have a home, they want to have security, they want to have a future. And we all are the same there, everyone, inside and outside Europe. I think what is going wrong sometimes is that we are treating people in groups, in anonymous groups, instead of talking about the individuals. And that's exactly what you said, because the moment we start talking about the individuals, people will become also much more tolerant. You always hear that, of course, people say, yeah, I don't want them. Yeah, my neighbor, but he's okay, but I don't want them. It's always, as soon as it's about the individuals, people are totally different than when we're talking about the groups. And I think the other point is, why are we in Europe so nervous about it, is if you are insecure about your own future, it is difficult to be open to others. And I think this is also why in our policies we have to give also our kind of every European a prospect to have trust in the future again. And partly that is, of course, why we are making our future economy agenda, but also our social agenda. And the last point, this is about when you said integration, this is also very national politics. But I think just one example, and then I will really shut up, but one example that's showing you how wrong it can go is here in the Netherlands. When we were creating asylum centers in the Netherlands, instead of focusing on what is the best way to then immediately also integrate and make sure that everyone is part of the society, we first of all said, well, you're not allowed to have a job as long as we don't know for sure whether you are a refugee or not. So you are there sitting in a center, not allowed to have a job. That's already not helping. Secondly, because of economic reasons, because it's cheaper that way, we put them in big centers. So the bigger, of course, the more efficiently it's done. But of course, this is also creating a lot of unrest in a society if in a small village suddenly a huge refugee center is coming. So that's why when we asked them, but why not smaller, you know, Yeah, that's more expensive. Okay, so we are now through an economic rationale thinking of such a fundamental thing of integration. And on top of that, the decision on where to do these asylum centers, it was usually just where it was the cheapest. So where the housing prices is the cheapest, which is again in those regions where they already feel that they are badly treated. And then on top of that, they have the feeling, see, there is on top of this inequality, it was being enlarged. The feeling of inequality was being enlarged by these kind of decisions. This shows you how fundamentally wrong and short-sighted we sometimes are in our policies of integration, which is then, of course, creating this distance between them and us. And if there is anything wrong for our future society, if we keep on creating a large distance between us and them, because in my society there's no us and them, there's only us.
And these are the final words closing this discussion. Thank you, Bas Eickhout, for having taken the time to be with us tonight.
Thank you for the invitation. It was good fun. I found.
Thank you all for joining us. As you can see from the big screen, we have a rap battle coming up at 8:30, and we also have a stand-up comedy show at 8 o'clock. So after a busy day, we can all relax a little bit, play some music, and have some comedy. Thank you.